Lieutenant Colonel Brant Dixon, 437th Operations Group, Standardization Evaluations, Senior Flight Examiner. Well, it's a few things. Most importantly, we're responsible for ensuring the standardization of our crew force, making sure all of our pilots are doing the same kind of operations, the same quality level, and we also give evaluations. We give them their flight examinations. We make sure that they are qualified to conduct missions worldwide across air, land, airdrop, aerial refueling. Well, absolutely. I mean, we start with a new co-pilot that gets to the base, and they're brand new, straight out of Altus. They know the very basics of the C-17. They're going to have a couple years of on-the-job training, and every 15 months or so they're going to get a recurring evaluation, a flight evaluation, just to make sure that they're able to do the things that they're supposed to be able to do. Fly low level, fly an assault landing. Eventually they'll upgrade to aircraft commander, and then we'll have to make sure that they're good at being able to deal with mission scenarios, mission issues, flying overseas, international procedures, and then ultimately air refueling and airdrop as well. We conduct those, not necessarily the initial evaluations, but generally the recurring evaluations. Well, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences over the years. I mean, I started flying back in 2002, and I learned at least flying for the Air Force operationally in large aircraft back in 2002. And I started learning from a lot of different instructors. The big thing for me was to have patience and let students make some mistakes, not ones that would compromise safety, but make those mistakes and let them fail just a little bit. Give them a safety net. But let them make those mistakes, because that's how they're going to really learn. It really takes a human to teach another human, and sometimes those decisions of how far to let someone go. We always say, give them enough rope to hang themselves, but not necessarily exactly that much. Maybe just a little bit less. We don't want to have any problems with safety or any problems with, maybe a mission delay, maybe depending on the type of mission. To let them feel that pressure before it's on them, when they're on their own, having to do it by themselves. Well, I can think of one actually in particular, was flying into Ali Al Salim in Kuwait. I was flying with a student who was struggling at the time, and it was a complicated approach coming out of Iraq, where you're very high and fast and having to land immediately into an airfield that's right across the border. The student was behind the aircraft, having trouble making the descent, and I was watching, making sure that things were safe, and she was getting task saturated with the automation. The aircraft, the C-17 is a fantastically automated airplane. It has every kind of autopilot known to man, and they teach that during initial training to rely on the autopilot. But sometimes it's just best to kick it all off and fly manually. When you can't get the machine to do what you want it to do, sometimes it's best to just turn the machine off and operate manually. She was trying to get the machine to do what she wanted so much that her head was focused down and not looking up, and not worried about landing the airplane. And I let her get basically all the way down to final approach, short final, before I basically had to take the aircraft from her and say, okay, we're going to turn off the autopilot, let's focus on landing this airplane, we're going to get the gear down, we're going to get the flaps down, and we're going to land. But I let her make all of those mistakes along the way, and then we talked about it after we landed. Say, here are all the things you did that led up to this scenario, and here's how we fixed it. So next time when we do this, you'll know if you can't get the machine to do what you want it to do, kick it off, fly by hand. Well, I think you'd learn a few things. One, that automation is a great thing, but it's not everything. You have to be able to manage automation, and it can reduce your workload, which is great in certain phases of flight. And the automation can be a great tool when you're task saturated, but when you're visual, when you can see the airfield, sometimes it's best to rely on just your eyes and your hands and be able to just worry about the here and right now instead of getting focused on the details of something you were trying to get right. Well, it's definitely changing. I mean, I've seen quite a bit of difference in the students that are coming to us from the coasts, or from here at Charleston from pilot training, because they've got the whole UPT Next, where students are getting virtual training in pilot training. Their pilot training is condensed. They're getting less flights because of the quality of the simulators, and that's a good thing. I mean, I want the training to be as short as it can be, as long as it's of high quality. And those virtual experiences are helping them, but there's still no substitute for a human and for actually doing the job of flying the airplane. And as far as being an instructor and actually imparting experience, there's no way for a machine to impart experience. There's no way for a machine to share 20 years of operational flying. It's just not possible. All of the scenarios that I've been through all over the world, on all 7 continents, doing this mission, there's no way for a machine to have run into every single one of those scenarios and then be able to relate it to another person. It might be able to give you one specific scenario and tell you exactly how the machine, the perfect solution, is to that. But they can't share the mistakes that they learned along the way. They can't share the things that they learned from their experiences, so that the new student may not have to learn from. They can learn from my mistakes instead of making them themselves. There are a lot of experiences that you find just through operating this airplane, as far as having emergency scenarios, when you have an engine fire, when you have a structural failure, when you lose a hydraulic system, when you have a mission delay, when having to coordinate with the outside agencies. That makes me a better instructor, though. I think the only thing that's made me a better instructor is teaching, honestly, is experience teaching other students, and just years of seeing students and how they've made their mistakes in the past makes me be able to anticipate mistakes that future students are going to have, but not necessarily expect them, but be ready for the mistakes. Like when I'm coaching in air fueling. Air fueling is an extremely delicate procedure that requires precision on the controls, absolute precision, because you're flying within inches of another airplane flying at 300, 400 miles an hour. There's no way around, but someone has to actually physically do it. There's no way for autopilot to do this at this point. I have to take my hands off the controls, and I have to let them control that airplane in contact with another airplane. And the only way to get that ability to teach that is to have done it over and over and over, and to build that muscle memory of what it feels like to actually control the airplane in that environment, and to see those errors that I anticipate them making, like a wing rock, or a pilot-induced oscillation, or maybe overcompensating on the throttles, pushing too far forward, pulling too far back. I almost have a feeling of where the airplane is going to be before it's going to be there, because of how many times I've done it. And I think that what makes me a better instructor is instructing, and to have experience with all different kinds of students. Again, there's probably quite a few of those over the years. I know one that I've used recently is that same student I was talking about earlier. I mean, she was struggling then, but I realized that part of that was also just my instructional technique wasn't probably the best for her. And I kind of learned that I need to adapt myself as an instructor to better serve my students. And I'm naturally a kind of a coaching instructor. I like to let people make those mistakes and kind of coach them through it, more like a servant leadership model. But sometimes when a student is really new to something, you need to be more direct. And that's what they're really needing is correction right now, and direct correction. Tell me exactly what to do. Some students need that right then, and that's when I learned that. So I changed my instructional style, and I flew with her again a couple more times, and we used a more direct style. She responded really well and started getting better super fast. And I mean, now she flies with 89th, on the presidential airlift. I mean, so it makes me feel pretty happy that I was able to, help a student go from struggling to, pretty much top of the pyramid. I think that honestly, the only thing I would add is that the role of the instructor pilot in the Air Force is only going to become more critical, probably because of what you're talking about with the automation and UPT Next and the shortening of pilot training and the focus on trying to generate more pilots in the Air Force. Right now, there's a crisis of qualified aviators, not just in the Air Force, but in the United States and in the world as a whole. Aviation has a high barrier to entry, so a lot of people avoid becoming pilots. But we need them more than we've ever needed them. The Air Force is small. We need every single pilot we can possibly get. And the role of the instructor is to impart that experience along the way. And as we're generating more pilots and condensing pilot training, that role becomes more and more critical. Because aviation is just, by nature, a field where there is no room for being unsafe, even a little bit. It's absolutely critical to be safe at all times. And especially when you're talking about a student. Students are going to make mistakes. That's just part of learning. And then an instructor having that experience to know what mistakes to let them make, and then what mistakes are going too far that could lead to a safety problem. So I think the role of the instructor is just going to become more and more important. And that is the same as the evaluators, the flight examiners like me that are watching the instructors, making sure that the instructors are instructing the right standards and to the right safety levels. I like to think so because I know I had a big hand in training a lot of my replacements. I think that just due to the nature of some of the missions, we don't do as much air fueling as we used to. We don't do as much of the tactical flying as we used to, but that's just the nature of the operations. I think that the instructor corps and the aircraft commander corps, if they're tasked to do it, they'll step up because they've been trained properly. I think I am leaving. I'm getting ready to retire here in less than a month, and I think that I am leaving the Air Force in good shape right now. I was. September 11th happened when I was in T-37 primary training at Laughlin Air Force Base. It doesn't matter if you're a lieutenant or a lieutenant colonel, everyone needs to get their flight evaluation and meet and exceed standards. Now, regularly I'll go in and I'll talk to current ops, find out who needs check ride, what kind of mission is available to give the check ride on, and then I'll head out and conduct the evaluation.